the man, he's the myth, he's the legend, he's the scientist with all the answers to all the questions. It's time for another episode of Alex's Science Corner.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you.
What's with that circular clapping?
It's a round of applause.
Ah.
You say that every time you ask me that.
I've reached a new plateau.
Yeah.
Alex, what's going on?
That same joke?
Yeah.
What's going on in the wide world of science, my friend?
All right, story number one is researchers, biologists in the Philippines have found a new type of worm. And this worm is a worm that eats rocks. Now, it's a worm related to, or it's called a shipworm. The cousin species that it's off of is called a shipworm because the shipworm eats wood. And the way Europeans first discovered the shipworm was that as they approached the tropics in South America and the Philippines, they started to find that these worms started to eat their ships. So the wooden hulls of the ships would deteriorate because the worms were eating the bottoms out of the ships. And, you know, having the bottom eaten out of a ship is usually a bad thing to
Yeah,
happen.
I would think that.
Yeah. So this is
Wouldn't
a
want that.
related species that they've discovered in the Philippines. And it's mostly like a shipworm in that, you know, it's the same kind of worm, except that the front bony structure that is used to eat wood has more grinding kind of teeth, and it burrows very, very slowly through rock and picks out the nutrients from rocks, and it poops out sand. And they found these really nice circular holes leading into these rocks, and biologists broke open the rocks and they found these worms eating the rock.
Prison breakout with
Yeah,
rock-eating
this
worms.
is really interesting.
Yeah, so it's they
And
can
they've got
belong.
bacteria that actually eats this. This is
Right. And the
digestive
bacteria, the digestion from the bacteria then feeds the worm. So it's a symbiosis in the worm. But the worms are range in size from small hand-sized worms, so that you could hold one in your hand, to ones that are about 2 feet in length.
Wow.
Yeah, is that
these
how
worms.
long a meter is? It's about
A meter is about 3 feet.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's around 3 feet. These are disgusting looking creatures. If you see the video that's on the links, and you can see that they're clear, they're translucent, so you can see their digestive organs in the worm. Really cool, though, that you've got a worm that eats rocks.
I bet you can find that on YouTube, too.
Yes, well, that's where the videos are going to be.
Okay.
Yes.
Or on Alex's Science Corner YouTube channel.
The American Association of Science, the Science Channel, they've got the videos up there.
Now, what I'm a little confused about, it says that these are really more like clams, or are they worms? Because this article mentions clams twice.
Yeah, well, clams, strangely enough, are kind of in the worm family. They're closer to worms than not. And so
did not
what
know
you
that.
would have had, the shell that a clam has, on these particular worms, it's come into being their mouth organs, or their grinding organs, I should say. Because they don't have a mouth like we would think of it. Their shell transformed into the grinding tool that it uses to grind up the material so that it could eat it.
Because and don't clams, the shell is, the clam makes the shell.
Right.
too.
And again, the shell is there on a regular clam. The shell is there as a protective shield or cover for the worm part.
Animal. Yeah.
Right. But for these worms, the shell has subsumed to not being a protective thing, but a grinding thing to grind up the material.
Okay.
Just like we have teeth, but it's a different way it made it. So it's the shell changed into being a grinding tool.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. Next story.
My favorite.
Okay. They found that there are two Earth-like worlds orbiting a red dwarf star only 12.5 light years away. Now, first of all, they've discovered these are two rocky worlds, and they are within the star's habitable zone. Does that mean that there's life on there?
Of course it does.
It does not. And one of the things, for example, Venus and Mars are within our sun's habitable zone. So, there's a wide range of planets that could still be in a habitable zone. It's just that it just opens up more possibilities.
But it has to have atmosphere and water.
At this moment, we don't know if that's what these have. Okay. We just know it's a rocky world a certain distance from its star. Now, one of the things about how this was discovered, most of the discoveries we've been making for the past few years of these extrasolar planets have been by the transit method. And what that is we've been watching a star for a very long time, and when the planet passes in front of the starlight dips. And then we measure the starlight dip versus the next time the starlight dips, and that tells us the distance, that there is a planet around there and how long its orbit is, which tells us its distance. Well, the way they did this is they're measuring the light of the star, but as the planet moves around the star, it rocks the star a little bit.
Yeah, there's a gravitational pull.
There's a
there.
gravitational tug of the planet and the star against each other. And that little bit of a shift causes a red shift or a blue shift to the star's light that we get. Our instruments are now sensitive enough that we can detect that red shift or that blue shift. And so by the way the star is rocking back and forth as the planets orbit around it, we can determine that it has planets around it. Now, there's certain limitations on that method, but it's still, you don't have to wait for the planet to pass in front of the star, because that's only for planets that are perfectly aligned with us. I mean, the fact that we found as many planets as we have with having the planet pass in front of the star, because think about it like having a plate. All the different ways the plate can be angled except just edge on. And you'd have to look at the plate edge on to see the
shadow.
Right.
Yeah.
But if the plate that you're looking at is not edge on, you're not going to see the planet through the transit method. But again, these planets are pretty close, only 12 and a half light years away. Still, that's,
doable.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
It depends on which sci-fi stories that you're thinking about.
You turned your mic off.
I did.
Brian turned his own mic off.
I'm telling myself to shut up.
But I thought it was fascinating, too, that they were able to detect the fact that there's planets around there with this new
it's actually not new. It's
newer.
It's actually older than the transit method.
Oh,
But
okay.
the problem was that they did not have as accurate instruments that they needed to detect this small size planet. When they started this, they could detect larger planets, and they could detect really large planets really close. But until recently, these instruments have gotten good enough to start detecting the smaller planets farther away.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the red dwarf real quick. So that sun, is that a dying sun then?
No. Red dwarfs are small stars. They're going to be about half to 2/3 the size of our sun.
Okay.
The planets are going to be, the habitable zone is going to be closer. They don't burn fuel as fast. That's one of the ironies. Super giant stars can last 100,000 to 1 million years before they blow up in supernovas, because they're so large. They burn all their fuel so fast that they're going to explode very quickly. Red dwarfs, on the other hand, because they're small, even though they have much, much less fuel, they can last 10 billion, maybe even 50 billion years that they will last before they will die out.
Okay.
So they will last a very long time.
Okay, so these planets that are in the habitable zone have a longer life, theoretically, than
Correct.
our Earth would
There
have.
are other challenges to that. For the habitable zone for a red dwarf star, it's going to be much closer to the star. And the downside to being much closer to the star is, even though you have to be closer to get the heat and the equivalent radiant light, you are also closer for, if the star has explosions, all the radio waves, all the stellar material that flies off, much easier for it to hit the planet. So those planets are going to suffer from more radiation.
Okay, yeah. What do we call that here? Solar flares?
Solar flares,
You've been much more affected by solar flares.
coronal mass ejections.
Okay.
So there are different types of stuff that the sun emits, and the solar flares.
So there's
are
positive
gonna
and
be,
negatives.
Yeah, they're going to suffer more solar flares than we are going to suffer.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
All right. If you have any questions about these stories or anything else science related or Formula One racing, feel free to call Alex right now at 203
837
99.
24.